17-year-old Danta Wright sat in the Washtenaw County courtroom, smiling and nearly laughing as Jordan Klee's mother's victim impact statement was being read. The teenager who had just pleaded guilty to shooting an 18-year-old in the back of the head during a robbery was treating the courtroom like it was some kind of joke. Jordan Klee was a senior at Pioneer High School who excelled in his studies, played on the football team, and had dreams of becoming an engineer. Now his family sat just feet away from his killer, watching this display of complete disrespect. This wasn't just any murder case. This was Ann Arbor's first homicide of 2016, and it had shaken the entire community to its core. The victim was everything a parent hopes their child will become: academically gifted, athletically talented, and full of potential. Quick question before we dive deeper. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from right now, because this case is going to make your blood boil no matter what country you're in. When given the chance to speak before sentencing, Wright looked directly at the grieving family and said, "I just wanted to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. I'll be all right. I love my family." The audacity of those words would echo through that courtroom and beyond. But this story of pure evil and the justice that followed begins 8 months earlier on a quiet October evening in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when 3 teenagers made a decision that would destroy multiple families forever. This is Accused, where we dig deep into the cases that reveal the darkest side of human nature and expose the truth behind the headlines that shock us all. Thank you to our growing community of truth seekers for joining us on this journey into real crime and real consequences. If you're new here and you want to see justice served to those who think they're above the law, hit that subscribe button right now, because today's case will restore your faith in the system when it matters most. When 18-year-old Jordan Klee was found dead in October 2016, it sent shockwaves through Ann Arbor because violent crime like this simply didn't happen in this university town known for academic excellence and peaceful neighborhoods. The community was left asking how 3 teenagers could commit such a senseless act of violence against someone who represented everything good about their city. Today, you're going to hear the confession that stunned a courtroom, witness the behavior that made a judge lose his composure, and understand how 3 teenagers destroyed multiple lives for absolutely nothing more than what they thought they could steal. This is the story of how a routine robbery became cold-blooded murder, and how one killer's arrogance in court sealed his fate forever while teaching us all a lesson about justice and consequences. Jordan Klee was 18 years old and in his senior year at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, a school known for producing some of Michigan's brightest students. His obituary described him as someone who excelled in his studies and had already proven himself as both an athlete and a scholar. Jordan played football for the Pioneer High School team and had been awarded both the Scholar Athlete Award for Academic Excellence and the NAACP Award, showing that he was not only talented on the field but also committed to making a difference in his community. These weren't participation trophies or honorary mentions. These were serious awards given to students who truly stood out from their peers. Jordan had big dreams that were well within his reach. He wanted to become an engineer and had the grades, the work ethic, and the talent to make it happen. Anyone who knew Jordan could see that he was destined for great things.
He was described by those who loved him as having a very energetic, happy-go-lucky nature, and was known for being crafty and mechanically minded, exactly the kind of traits that would have made him an excellent engineer. Jordan lived alone at the Pine Lake Village Cooperative, a condominium complex in Ann Arbor where many students chose to live because it offered independence while still being close to the university and high school communities. October 4th, 2016 was supposed to be just another school day. Jordan was expected to be in class at Pioneer High School, probably thinking about his upcoming graduation and his plans for college. Instead, it became the day his bright future was stolen by 3 teenagers who saw him as nothing more than an easy target, someone they could rob without thinking about the consequences.
Those teenagers were Danta Wright, Jermarius Ellison, and Delreno Gracie, and they had come to the Pine Lake Village Cooperative with one goal: to rob someone and take whatever they could get their hands on.
On October 4th, 2016, Danta Wright and two other teens, Jermarius Ellison and Delreno Gracie, made their way to the Pine Lake Village Cooperative Apartments in Ann Arbor with a plan that they probably thought was foolproof. They wanted to steal drugs, clothes, and shoes, basic items that teenagers might have in their apartments that could be sold quickly for cash. These weren't hardened criminals or experienced thieves who had spent years perfecting their craft. They were teenagers who thought they could make some quick money by threatening someone with a gun and walking away without any serious consequences. The plan was probably simple in their minds: find someone alone, point a gun at them, demand their valuables, and leave. They probably never thought about what would happen if things went wrong, or if their victim fought back, or if they panicked and made a decision they couldn't take back. Wright and his two accomplices were specifically trying to rob Jordan Klee at gunpoint, though it's unclear whether they targeted him specifically or if he was just the unfortunate person they happened to encounter first. What started as what they probably thought would be a simple robbery lasting maybe 5 or 10 minutes was about to turn into something much worse, something that would change their lives and the lives of multiple families forever. Wright later admitted in court that he and his two friends were attempting to rob the 18-year-old at gunpoint. But robberies can go wrong quickly, especially when you're dealing with teenagers who haven't thought through all the possible outcomes. When you're pointing a gun at someone, the line between theft and murder becomes dangerously thin, and one moment of panic or anger can turn a property crime into a capital offense. According to Wright's own confession, given months later, in a courtroom filled with Jordan's grieving family members, during the robbery attempt, he shot Jordan Klee in the back of the head, killing him instantly, and destroying any chance he had of living the life he had worked so hard to build. The murder itself was as senseless as it was brutal, and the details that emerged during the investigation painted a picture of a young man who probably never had a chance to defend himself or even understand what was happening to him. During the robbery, things went wrong in the worst possible way, and Wright fatally shot Klee in the back of the head with what investigators determined was a single gunshot fired at close range. A maintenance worker at the Pine Lake Village Cooperative heard gunshots echoing through the complex and rushed to investigate, finding Jordan lying on a path outside the building with a single gunshot wound that had already taken his life. Think about that for a moment. Jordan was shot in the back of the head, meaning he was likely trying to run away from his attackers or had already given up whatever they wanted and was trying to leave the situation. This wasn't self-defense or a fight that got out of hand between people who knew each other and had some kind of ongoing dispute. This was an execution-style killing of a teenager who was probably just trying to get home safely, maybe thinking about homework or plans with friends or his dreams of becoming an engineer. The medical examiner would later determine that the shot was fired from close range, meaning Wright had to be standing very near to Jordan when he pulled the trigger. By the time help arrived at the Pine Lake Village Cooperative, it was too late. Jordan Klee was dead at 18 years old, his dreams of becoming an engineer cut short by 3 teenagers who decided his life was worth less than whatever they thought they could steal from him. His body was discovered on that pathway where he had fallen, and the image of this promising young man lying dead would haunt the first responders and investigators who arrived on the scene. Ann Arbor police knew immediately that they were looking for multiple suspects based on witness accounts and evidence at the scene, and they began making arrests within days as the investigation moved forward with the kind of urgency that a community expects when one of their brightest young people has been murdered in cold blood. Here's a question that's going to divide the comments section and really make you think about what you would do in an impossible situation. You're 18 years old, walking alone near your home, when 3 armed teenagers approach you demanding your belongings. You can see they have a gun, and they're clearly serious about using it if they have to. You have two choices: fight back and risk being shot, knowing that you might be able to overpower them, but also knowing that one wrong move could cost you your life, or comply with their demands and hope they just take your stuff and leave you alone to walk away safely. What would you do in that terrifying moment when you have seconds to decide between resistance and compliance? Drop your answer in the comments and explain your reasoning, but remember, as you're thinking about this, Jordan Klee never got the chance to make that choice because he was shot in the back of the head, suggesting he may have been trying to run away, or had already complied with whatever demands they made. Stick around, because what happens next in the courtroom will show you exactly what kind of person pulled that trigger and how his behavior after the murder revealed his true character. Ann Arbor police worked quickly and methodically to make arrests in Jordan's murder, treating this case with the urgency it deserved, because the community was demanding answers and justice for a young man who had represented the best of their city. The investigation moved forward with the kind of thoroughness that gives families hope that justice will be served, and that their loved one's death will not be in vain. Within days of the murder, all three suspects were in custody, and the evidence against them was overwhelming thanks to witness testimony, physical evidence at the scene, and eventually their own confessions. The other two people charged in this case, Jermarius Ellison and Delreno Gracie, also pleaded guilty to their roles in the crime, acknowledging their participation in the robbery that led to Jordan's death. But it was Danta Wright who had pulled the trigger, and it was Wright who would face the most serious charges and the heaviest sentence. Wright was the one who had made the decision to fire that fatal shot, and he would be the one who had to face Jordan's family and explain why he had taken their son's life. What was supposed to be a pre-trial hearing where lawyers would discuss procedural matters, and scheduling turned into something no one expected when Wright decided to confess to his crimes in open court. Jordan's mother was in court that day, sitting just feet away from Wright as he gave his shocking testimony about what had happened on that October evening. The confession was stunning. Wright calmly admitted to killing the high school student without showing any of the emotion or remorse that people expect to see when someone is confessing to murder. Wright admitted that he and two other friends were trying to rob 18-year-old Jordan Klee when he shot and killed him, laying out the basic facts of the case in a matter-of-fact way that disturbed everyone who heard it. But this confession wasn't accompanied by tears of remorse, expressions of regret, or apologies to the victim's family. Instead, Wright delivered it with a calmness that disturbed everyone in the courtroom and gave the first hint of the arrogance that would later shock the nation. The family of Jordan Klee had to make one of the most difficult decisions any family can face when dealing with the murder of a loved one. They had to decide whether they wanted to go through the emotional trauma of a full trial or accept a plea deal that would guarantee Wright would serve serious prison time. After careful consideration and probably countless sleepless nights weighing their options, they decided they didn't want to go through the pain of a full trial, where they would have to relive Jordan's death over and over again as evidence was presented and witnesses testified. Wright had already confessed to the murder, and the evidence against him was overwhelming, so there was no real question about his guilt. The only question was how much time he would serve and whether the family could find some measure of peace knowing that justice had been served. A plea deal was arranged where Wright would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for avoiding a first-degree murder trial that could have taken months to complete and put the family through unimaginable additional pain. This meant Wright would face a sentencing hearing where the victim's family would finally get their chance to speak about how Jordan's death had affected their lives, and where a judge would determine how many years Wright would spend behind bars for taking a life. The sentencing hearing was scheduled, and the family prepared to face Wright one more time as they shared their victim impact statements and asked the court to give him a sentence that reflected the magnitude of what he had taken from them. Danta Wright was expected to be sentenced for second-degree murder, and the family of victim Jordan Klee was expected to speak at the hearing about their loss and how Jordan's death had changed their lives forever. What no one expected was that Wright would turn his sentencing hearing into one of the most disrespectful displays ever seen in a courtroom, a performance so shocking that it would make national news and teach everyone watching about the importance of showing remorse when facing the consequences of your actions. Danta Wright was in court to learn his sentence for his part in the murder of 18-year-old Jordan Klee, a moment that should have been the culmination of the justice process, and a time for the community to see that serious crimes have serious consequences. This was supposed to be a solemn moment where a killer would face the consequences of his actions, listen respectfully to the victim's family, and show some remorse for taking a young man's life and destroying the hopes and dreams that Jordan had worked so hard to build. Instead, it became a display of arrogance and disrespect that shocked seasoned court officials who had seen everything in their careers but had never witnessed anything quite like what Wright was about to do. The courtroom was packed with Jordan's family members, friends from school, teachers who had believed in his potential, and community members who wanted to see justice served for a young man who had represented the best of their city. Wright was seen smiling and laughing while a victim impact statement was read by Jordan's family, treating the most solemn moment in the legal process like it was entertainment designed for his amusement. Danta Wright sat in court smiling and nearly laughing as Jordan Klee's mother shed tears for her son and tried to put into words the pain of losing a child to senseless violence. The victim impact statement included heartbreaking words that would bring tears to the eyes of anyone with a conscience. "I've lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren." Read by cousin Courtney Klee from a statement prepared by Jordan's mother, who was too overcome with grief to read it herself. "This was supposed to be a year of celebration," said Courtney Klee, Jordan's cousin, who read a statement on behalf of his mother, explaining how Jordan's senior year and graduation should have been filled with joy and pride instead of funerals and court hearings. While these words of grief and loss filled the courtroom and brought tears to the eyes of everyone present, Wright continued to smile and laugh as if he was watching a comedy show instead of facing the consequences of murder and listening to a mother's pain over losing her child.
The worst moment came when Wright was given the chance to address the court before his sentencing, an opportunity that defendants typically use to express remorse, apologize to the victim's family, and ask for mercy from the judge. This is usually the moment when even the most hardened criminals try to show some humanity and acknowledge the pain they have caused, understanding that their words could make the difference between a lighter sentence and the maximum punishment allowed by law. After being given the chance to speak in court, and with all eyes on him as the courtroom waited to hear if he had learned anything from this process or felt any regret for his actions, Wright instead chose to taunt the victim's family in a way that left everyone present speechless. "I just wanted to tell y'all, I'll be home soon," Wright said, looking directly at Jordan's grieving relatives, with what witnesses described as a smirk on his face. "I'll be all right. I love my family." These words hit the grieving family like a slap in the face and sent a clear message that Wright felt no remorse for what he had done and was confident that he would serve minimal time for taking a life. Here was the person who had murdered their son, their nephew, their hope for the future, telling them that he'd be home soon and that everything would be all right for him while they would spend the rest of their lives missing Jordan. The audacity was breathtaking, and the complete lack of empathy or understanding showed everyone in that courtroom exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. This wasn't the first time the teen had shocked the courtroom with his behavior. His laughter and smiling during the victim impact statements had already shown his true character. But this moment of directly taunting a grieving family was about to cost him dearly because the judge had been watching everything and was about to respond in a way that would wipe the smile off Wright's face forever. The judge's response was swift, furious, and exactly what Wright's behavior deserved after his shocking display of disrespect and arrogance. Wright was sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison for Klee's murder, a sentence that was on the higher end of what was possible for second-degree murder, and clearly reflected the judge's disgust with Wright's courtroom behavior and complete lack of remorse. The judge made it clear that Wright's behavior in court had not gone unnoticed and had likely influenced the severity of his sentence, sending a message that showing disrespect to victims' families and taunting them during sentencing hearings will result in the harshest possible consequences. 23 to 50 years means Wright will serve at least 23 years before he's even eligible for parole, and he could serve the full 50 years if the parole board decides his attitude hasn't changed and he still poses a danger to society. This means that Wright's prediction that he'd be home soon turned out to be completely wrong and showed just how little he understood about the seriousness of his situation. At 17 years old when he committed the crime, Wright will be at least 40 years old before he has any chance of freedom, and he could spend the rest of his life behind bars if he doesn't learn to show remorse and take responsibility for his actions. The smiles and laughter stopped immediately when the reality of his sentence hit him, and the teenager who had been so confident about going home soon realized that his arrogance had cost him decades of his life. His mother, who had been sitting in the courtroom supporting him throughout the hearing, broke down as she realized that her son would be middle-aged before he had any chance of coming home, and that his behavior had made his situation much worse than it needed to be. The case sparked discussions throughout Michigan and beyond about juvenile justice, the role of remorse in sentencing, and how the justice system should handle young offenders who show no empathy for their victims. Legal experts noted that while Wright's age at the time of the crime was taken into consideration, his behavior during the legal process clearly influenced the judge's decision to give him a sentence on the higher end of the possible range. The case became an example of how a defendant's conduct in court can impact their sentence, even when the facts of the case have already been established through a guilty plea. Wright's behavior was so shocking that it made news outlets across the country, with many people expressing outrage at his treatment of Jordan's family and satisfaction that he received a lengthy sentence that reflected his lack of remorse. The case also highlighted the devastating impact that gun violence has on communities like Ann Arbor, where residents had felt safe and secure until 3 teenagers with a gun changed everything in a matter of minutes. Jordan's death wasn't just a tragedy for his family. It was a wake-up call for an entire community about the reality of violent crime and the importance of supporting victims' families through the long and difficult process of seeking justice. The Pine Lake Village Cooperative, where Jordan lived and died, became a reminder of how quickly life can change and how senseless violence can reach into any neighborhood, no matter how safe it seems. Today, Danta Wright sits in a Michigan prison, serving his sentence for the senseless murder of Jordan Klee, and probably thinking about how different his life might have been if he had made better choices, or at least shown some remorse when he had the chance. He's surrounded by other inmates who committed serious crimes, and he has decades ahead of him to think about the moment when he decided to pull that trigger and take a life for no good reason. The teenager who thought he'd be home soon is now learning what it means to grow up behind bars, to miss family gatherings and holidays, to watch his friends move on with their lives while he remains locked up for a crime that took seconds to commit but will cost him decades to pay for. Jordan Klee was remembered by his community as an energetic young man with dreams of becoming an engineer and making a positive impact on the world around him. He had earned academic awards and played football, representing the best of what a young person could achieve when they work hard and stay focused on their goals. His life was stolen for nothing more than whatever Wright and his accomplices thought they could take from him during a robbery that probably netted them very little and certainly wasn't worth a human life. The case raises difficult questions about how we handle juvenile offenders who commit adult crimes, but Wright's behavior in court made it clear that age doesn't excuse evil and that some actions deserve serious consequences, regardless of how old the perpetrator is. His complete lack of remorse, his taunting of the victim's family, and his confident prediction that he'd be home soon showed a level of callousness that demanded serious consequences and proved that he was dangerous to society. The contrast between Jordan's potential and Wright's callousness could not have been more stark. One was a young man building a future, and the other was a young man willing to destroy futures for temporary gain. Tomorrow, we're covering another case where a killer's courtroom behavior sealed their fate. The story of a woman who laughed during her murder trial and immediately regretted it when the judge responded with the maximum sentence possible. If you believe that justice matters and that victims deserve better than smirking killers who show no remorse for their actions, subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we're not done exposing the truth behind these cases that shock our communities. We're going to keep bringing you the stories that the mainstream media doesn't tell, the details that reveal the true character of these criminals, and the moments when justice is finally served to those who think they're above the law. Jordan Klee should be 26 years old today, probably working as an engineer somewhere in Michigan and making the world a better place through his work and his positive attitude. Instead, his life ended at 18 because 3 teenagers decided to commit robbery with a gun, and one of them decided to pull the trigger when things didn't go according to their plan. His family still grieves for the son, nephew, and friend they lost, and his community still remembers the bright young man who represented everything good about their city before his life was cut short by senseless violence that could have been avoided if Wright had made different choices that October evening.